على صفحات التواصل الاجتماعي فيسبوك، تويتر وقناة اليوتيوب لإذاعة الجزائر الدولية. لمزيد من الأخبار تابعوا radioalgerie.dz/Radio Algérie International.
إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, has chaired a meeting of the Council of Ministers which dealt with presentations related to financing emerging enterprises measures and arrangements taken to reduce transit times. Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf has praised the consensus emerging from the African and Korean sides to strengthening partnership between the two sides during the preparatory ministerial meeting of the African-Korean Summit. The head of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, Anwar Philippe Lazzarini, has said that all the agency's shelters in Rafah have been emptied after the displacement of more than 1 million people. The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since the October 7th has risen to 36,439 reported fatalities, with an additional 82,627 individuals wounded. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, has chaired a meeting of the Council of Ministers which dealt with presentations related to financing emerging enterprises, measures and arrangements taken to reduce transit times through ports of imported goods, the following up of the progress of the digitization process, and following up of the Inges project seawater desalination plant in Tamda Ogmun, Tizi Ouzou. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has participated in Seoul in the preparatory ministerial meeting of the African-Korean Summit due to be held on Tuesday and Wednesday. More details in this report by Majid Mila.
The meeting, which was jointly chaired by Mauritania and the Republic of Korea, revolved around discussing the most important results expected to emerge from the summit, especially in terms of strengthening the partnership between the African and Korean sides in the political, economic, social and cultural fields. In his speech, Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf praised the consensus emerging from the African and Korean sides to strengthening partnership between the two sides. He also welcomed the initiatives put forward by the Republic of Korea to structure its interaction and cooperation with the countries of the African continent, highlighting the importance of adopting the principle of African ownership and taking into account the special circumstances faced by the countries and peoples of the continent, as well as supporting development solutions emanating from the 2063 African Union Agenda. On the sides of the meeting, Minister Ahmed Attaf held bilateral talks with his Mauritanian counterpart, Mr. Mohamed Salim Ould Marzouk, whose country chairs the summit's work equally with the Republic of Korea, as he currently ensures the presidency of the African Union. The two parties discussed the most important issues and topics on the summit's agenda, in addition to exchanging views on development at the continental and regional levels.
The Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Mr. Youssef Sharfa, has stressed that 1.5 million hectares of land are available for development and for attracting integrated investment projects in the south after examining the technical studies and maps made by the various concerned departments to identify areas suitable for integrated investment projects. Asia Bikar has more.
This came during the national meeting on the prospects for investment in strategic crops and the development of local breeds organized by the province of Naama under the patronage of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, to highlight the province's agricultural and economic assets and potential. Mr. Sharfa stressed that the agricultural land is essential to achieve the plan that stems from the commitments and guidelines of the President of the Republic aimed at meeting food needs, notably those of large-scale consumption, to strengthen food security. He added that the Agriculture Ministry is working on making available the land needed for integrated investment projects in southern provinces. During the meeting attended by several ministers, executives and officials, the Water Resources Minister, Taha Darbal, highlighted the contribution of his sector to the implementation of the strategic plan to achieve water and food security. The Interior Minister, Mr. Brahim Marad, for his part, has said that the organization of the national meeting sealed the definitive break with old models where such meetings were the prerogative of a few provinces with an approach that did not take into account local specificities.
ولاية النعامة التي فكرت ونظمت هذه التظاهرة الوطنية الموسومة النعامة.
The province of Naama, which has organized this honorable national event, is a promising province in the field of investment in strategic agriculture and the valorization of local breeds, which was granted the highly patronage of the President of the Republic. The province of Naama has made important steps in terms of local development, which are perceived as positive steps in terms of development indicators. Naama is getting ready now, thanks to its natural capacities, to upgrade to the level of the leading provinces in the field of strategic agriculture and livestock.
That was the Interior Minister, Mr. Brahim Marad, during the national meeting on the prospect for investment in strategic crops and development of local breeds in Naama province.
The war veteran and former diplomat Noordin Judy has affirmed that Algerian diplomacy has recovered under the leadership of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, its performance and its historical position, faithful to its principles of supporting just causes. More details in this report by Asya Bakar.
Speaking at the 5th edition of the Forum of the Algeria Press Service Agency dedicated to the central position of Algeria in Africa, Mr. Judy recalled that the President of the Republic is committed to strengthening Algeria's African belonging through the reinforcement of diplomatic action in order to allow Algeria regain its position in Africa as an essential and strategic party. He said Algeria has been supporting development projects in different brotherly African countries via the Algerian International Cooperation Agency for Solidarity and Development. The Algerian former diplomat said Algeria's initiatives as a non-permanent member at the UN Security Council mark the strong comeback of the Algerian diplomacy at the forefront of the international scene, emitting from her conviction that defending just causes is a noble principle of which Algeria will never deviate. He said Algeria at the Security Council has presented the voice of Africa and Arab countries, stressing that Algeria stands by human values, the right to life, and the principles of justice and peace through tireless work in favor of the consecration of the right to freedom for all African peoples, notably the Sahrawi people.
The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7 has risen to 36,439 reported fatalities, with an additional 82,627 individuals wounded. Local health authorities reported that the Israeli occupation forces committed 4 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the last 24 hours, resulting in the documented killing of at least 60 Palestinians and the injury of 220 others. Meanwhile, the Palestinian journalist at the Sot al-Watan radio station in Gaza, Ola el-Dahdou, was killed in bombing of the Israeli occupation of her home on El Jala Street in Gaza. According to a report by the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, on the number of casualties among journalists in Gaza, 107 journalists were killed, 32 others wounded, 2 reported missing, and 42 journalists arrested. Let's recall that crimes against journalists are a violation of all international laws and conventions, and Palestinian journalists must be protected in accordance with the international resolution issued by the UN Security Council. Dozens of Israeli settlers stormed the esplanade of Al-Aqsa Mosque in the occupied city of Al-Quds under the protection of the Israeli occupation police. The settlers entered the mosque in successive groups from the Maghribi Gate, led provocative marches on its esplanades, and performed Talmudic rituals in its courtyards. For its part, the police of the Zionist occupier have stepped up their restrictive measures at the gates of Al-Old City of Al-Quds and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Meanwhile, a Palestinian teenager was shot by the Israeli occupying forces during their intrusion into the Aqaba Jabr camp in the south of Ariha in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Authority has again called on the Zionist occupation to immediately and permanently halt the aggression in Gaza and in all the Palestinian land, including the east of Al-Quds, the capital of Palestine. All attacks and violations perpetrated by the occupation forces against the Palestinian people, their sacred places in the West Bank and Holy Al-Quds must stop, adding that the Palestinian Authority stressed the necessity of the withdrawal of the Zionist occupation forces from the Gaza Strip, in addition to the opening of all the crossings with the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority in accordance with the 2005 agreement on movement and access. It went on saying that handing over the crossings would facilitate the regular arrival of relief aid and all needs to the people in the Gaza Strip, in addition to preventing the displacement of the Palestinian people and ensuring their return to the dwellings and putting into their disposal all the basic services. The head of the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, has said that all the agency's shelters in Rafah, in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, have been emptied after the displacement of more than 1 million people due to the ongoing genocidal aggression. Majid Mila has more.
In a statement on his X platform, Lazzarini indicated that around 1.7 million people now live in Khan Yunis and central areas of the Gaza Strip, and the 36 UNRWA shelters in Rafah are now void, noting that the agency resumed its operations in Khan Yunis even though all its facilities there were damaged. In this context, Lazzarini went on to say that the United Nations agency was forced to suspend health and other vital services in Rafah. However, he further said that they are determined to stay and provide services. The UNRWA commissioner said that the amount of aid coming into Gaza is worthless compared to the needs, and he also warned that fuel in Gaza was about to run out. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Jassim Mohammed al-Badawi, has harshly condemned the Zionist occupying forces' attempts to undermine the efforts of the UNRWA, calling on the Zionist entity to facilitate the work of humanitarian organizations in line with international and humanitarian resolutions. Al-Badawi stressed at the same time the need for the international community to support the work and efforts of humanitarian organizations and to put an end to the illegal practices of the Zionist entity in occupied Palestine, particularly in Gaza. Al-Badawi stressed at the same time the need for the international community to support the work and efforts of humanitarian organizations and to put an end to the illegal practices of the Zionist entity in occupied Palestine, particularly in Gaza, subjected to genocidal aggression for almost 8 months.
The Arab Parliament has denounced the Zionist entity's attempt to classify UNRWA as a terrorist organization to criminalize its activities and lift its employees' immunity, calling on the international community to shoulder its responsibility so as to put an end to the repeated crimes and violations. The Arab Parliament underlined the important and major role of UNRWA, which provided aid and relief to approximately 6.4 million Palestinian refugees, including 2 million refugees in the Gaza Strip, the scene of an unprecedented Zionist aggression against the backdrop of famine. Meanwhile, Jordan has condemned the Zionist entity's attempts to classify UNRWA as a terrorist organization and target its activities by seeking to deprive it from its rights. China's permanent representative to the United Nations premises in Geneva, Mr. Chen Shu, has stressed that China supports the state of Palestine in playing a great role within the World Health Organization, WHO, during a speech made at the 77th World Health Assembly, WHA. The WHO adopted a draft resolution aimed at aligning Palestine's participation in the WHO with its participation in the UN within 101 votes in favour, 5 against and 21 abstentions. Mr. Chen recalled that the 10th emergency extraordinary session of the UN General Assembly recently adopted by an overwhelming majority resolution recognizing that Palestine qualifies for full membership of the UN, stressing that China welcomed the resolution, which reflected the will of the international community. He highlighted that China viewed the two-state solution as the one and only realistic way of resolving the Palestinian question, and that Palestine's full membership of the UN was an important step towards this aim. Belgium has condemned the Israeli occupation attempts to classify the UN Emergency Aid Agency for Palestine's Refugees, UNRWA, as a terrorist organization. Belgium's Foreign Minister Mrs. Hedja Al Habib wrote on X that Belgium condemns the Israeli Parliament's attempt to classify UNRWA as a terrorist organization and to remove the immunity of its staff. She added that UNRWA's activities are essential for the Palestinians in the face of the dramatic humanitarian situation in Gaza. Meanwhile, Jordan condemned the attempts by the Israeli occupation to classify the UNRWA as the terrorist organization and to target its activities seeking to deprive it of its rights. The Foreign Affairs Ministry considered that the continuing attempt to annihilate UNRWA and to politically assassinate it are illegal practices and represent a violation of international law. Meanwhile, the President of Pakistan, Mr. Asif Ali Zardari, for his part condemned the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian children, notably those displaced by the Israeli aggression, notably on Rafah. Chilean President Gabriel Boric has announced that his country will be joining South Africa in the application against the Zionist entity before the International Court of Justice, ICJ. In a message to his country's Congress, Boric declared that he has decided that Chile will support and join the request represented by South Africa before the International Court of Justice in The Hague as part of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocidal Crimes. The court seized at the end of December by South Africa ordered in January the Zionist entity to do its utmost to avoid any act of genocide and allow the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. In his speech, the Chilean president evoked the apocalyptic humanitarian situation in Gaza and called for a resounding response from the international community. Since the recognition of the State of Palestine by Spain, Ireland, Norway and Slovenia, France has been urged to follow their example. The pressure is particularly intense following the bombardment by Zionist forces of the Rafah camp for displaced persons of a few days ago, which resulted in the killing of 45 people. The French Communist Party's PCF recently launched a petition called on France to recognize the State of Palestine immediately and unconditionally. Back to national news, Algeria has celebrated World Africa Day corresponding to the 61st anniversary of the creation of the Organization of the African Unity, now the African Union. The ambassador of Tanzania to Algiers, Imen Najli Kal, said to our colleague Ait Mukhtar Mourad, this year's celebration is an opportunity to recall the existing challenges facing the continent and work on dealing with them.
As we celebrate the African Day today, I think it's high time to remind ourselves of the challenges Africa is facing as a whole. Similarly, we can remind ourselves of the opportunities Africa is presenting itself as a continent. For instance, now Africa is facing a number of challenges ranging from climate change, famine, drought. At the same time, we are aware that Africa presents almost 60% of the world's fertile arable land. Through this land, through mechanization of agriculture, the use of appropriate technology, it's, I think, high time for Africa to enhance the intra-regional trade through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as a tool we may use to enhance the intra-regional trade.
He added that African resources as those existing in Algeria can be fruitfully used as part of partnerships with African countries for the benefit of the development of the continent.
Countries like Algeria, they have resources. They can produce fertilizers. They have the technology for irrigation schemes through pivot irrigation or drip irrigation. So it's high time to share or to strike partnerships with other African countries and see Africa prosper within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Area.
The ambassador of Norway to Algiers, Therese Loken Geziel, who attended the celebration ceremony of the African Day, seized the opportunity to shed light on the importance of North-South cooperation.
I represent here a voice from the North, and we truly believe that we have more in common than things that might differ us. And I also believe in Afro-optimism, despite all the difficult issues that we live through both in Africa and other places in the world right now. So I think this kind of gathering is also a show of solidarity and to understand one another better. And again, I'm very, very honored and pleased to be here.
Those were the statements of diplomats attending the celebration of the Africa Day here in Algiers. That's it for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to our Event of the Week program by my colleague Essia Bekkar.
The International Event of the Week.
Hello there and welcome on our waves. Algeria summoned last week an Emergency Security Council meeting as the Israeli occupation pushed ahead with its military operation in Rafah, where over 1 million Palestinians had sought refuge. The meeting followed last week's Israeli airstrikes that triggered a fire engulfing tents in a camp for displaced Palestinians west of Rafah, killing 45 people and injuring over 100 others. The Israeli occupation labeled the camp as a safe zone for the displaced Palestinians, which reflects its intention to target civilians. Algeria tabled the draft resolution on Tuesday evening to its 15 members after emergency consultations on the escalating Israeli aggression in Rafah. The Israeli aggression in Rafah has persisted despite the worldwide outrage at the brutal massacre of the Dance camp declared earlier as a safe zone. To tackle this issue, we are joined on the phone by our political analyst Hamoud Salhi from California. Mr. Salhi, despite the UN Security Council's resolutions and the ICJ's calls on the Israeli occupation to put an immediate halt to its offensive, there is no change on the ground. What would make the Israeli occupation, in your opinion, halt its offensive in Rafah and in the entire Gaza Strip?
At this time, it is the United States that has the answer. It is financing, it is participating, and it is the key to Israel continuing its genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. It has used its veto on many levels, and in this case, the United States has the key to stop this war. Diplomatically, again, the obvious answer is the United States, that the United States has proven to be Israel's savior and has been the reason the Jewish state has never been held accountable for its violation of international laws, including the current genocide that we're witnessing in Gaza. October 7 has made Israel more vulnerable and the United States more concerned about its support for Israel. Efforts like those led by the South Africa and the International Court of Justice, and Algeria and the United Nations Security Council, and the recent decision by the International Criminal Court to hold Israeli leaders accountable before international law for the first time since the Nakba are all steps in the right direction that have potential to drive Israel to halt its genocidal activities in Palestine. and with time will no doubt create conditions that will inevitably force the United States to refrain from using its veto right to protect Israel. This proved to be a difficult task at this point, but as Algeria's top diplomat noted in the United States, with persistence and continuing to bring the matter of Israel's action before the United Nations Security Council, the United States will eventually refrain from using its veto right and the Security Council to make what is wrong right. But the most effective way to hold Israel is its defeat. The resilience of the Palestinian resistance has proven time and again to be an effective tool to defeat the Israeli grand strategy in Gaza. It has caused friction inside its domestic politics, marked by demonstration in the street calling for the prime minister to resign, or as this last few days calling for a ceasefire. Further, the resistance has caused Israel international isolation and its traditional allies to reconsider their support for the Jewish state. Recent developments have shown that when Israel is cornered, it has the tendency to call for some form of negotiation. The persistence and resilience of the Palestinian resistance is another way that Israel will have to hold its genocides in the West Bank, in Gaza and the West Bank for that matter.
How efficient are the resolutions of the UN Security Council, given that the vote that was used several times to stop a peace resolution was like a go-ahead to the Israeli occupation to pursue its genocide in Gaza?
The United Nations Security Council resolutions are an effective tool to hold those who violate international law accountable. But as former United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali noted, these resolutions are effective only to the extent that members of the United Nations allows it to be. But the veto that the permanent five members have exclusively has rendered the United Nations Security Council important and servicing agendas of those that serves better the big powers. As a result, as we all know, the United Nations resolutions have been effective only when interests of the five permanent members are aligned together and do not cause them any loss of interest. But when United Nations Security Council resolutions are blocked by a veto, they have a strong impact in the international community. It not only exposes who sides with the culprits in the eyes of the international community, they become a historical document for recording a justice gone wrong. The United Nations General Assembly understood this fact and has passed a resolution that now requires members using the veto to explain their actions before the General Assembly. This adds another credence to the General Assembly attempt to right a wrong, albeit with no means to enforce it. So regardless, despite the usage of the veto, the United Nations Security Council resolution are indeed an effective way to hold those who violate international law, even when they are not implemented.
Is there a possibility of seeing the allies of the Israeli occupation, notably the United States, push tangibly for a ceasefire, especially that the double standard has become flagrant?
Israel's traditional partners are slowly coming to the realization that they can no longer support Israel's genocidal actions in Palestine. Some of them expressing such dismay by recognizing the right of Palestinians to statehood, others by cutting diplomatic ties. What is also worth mentioning is that the solidarity with Israel among the population in Western societies, known in the past for their unconditional, unquestioned support for Israel, is slowly changing. A recent poll in the United States shows that over 30% of those interviewed had a favorable view of Palestine or Palestinians, and less than 20% in favor of Israelis. Within the Democratic Party in the US, over 70% of the youth support Palestine. This trend is also found in Great Britain, France, and other parts of Europe. The student movement is another indication that we are witnessing globally that support Gaza. It is another glaring experience of a grass movement that support the Palestinian movement. Although many nations have yet to translate this support in real action by way of sanction or cutting ties with the Jewish state, this is just, I believe, a matter of time, and the world community and those who support Israel